everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for this town hall Advocacy into Action with Representative Ramos and a few of our guest speakers. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to engage in discussion with constituents and members from our community. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started so we can be respectful of everybody's time. And I will now introduce Representative Ramos.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. I know it's a busy Friday night for everybody, and most of us also watched yesterday the January 6th insurrection hearing. So there's a lot of information out there, and most important, we need to continue our advocacy. What happened in Uvalde, Texas, and our thoughts and prayers and advocacy for those parents and families who suffered in that horrible shooting. And there's really not more that we can do here in the state of Texas. I know many of you have already seen the news and looked at the statistics over and over again and are wondering, why are we still here? And that's where our frustration comes from as well. You know, looking at the different statistics and in Texas, as one of your legislators who go to the Texas Capitol every 2 years and who fight. And honestly, one of the reasons that I ran for this seat is because during the time that I decided to run, I was a college professor and I taught government at El Centro College, and they had just passed the Campus Carry bill. My predecessor, who was Republican, voted for that bill. And I knew that there's no way that somebody who really knew what was going on in classrooms would vote for something like that. And that's what frustrated me the most, is that they voted for something that put people like myself and my students and my colleagues in danger, never having lived that experience of what it means to be an educator, what it means to be a teacher, with guns in our schools. And yes, a gun in a college campus, those are guns in schools. Those are still 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds who come to school frustrated, tired, hungry, like everybody else. And we're going to have some speakers today, one including Carrie Griffith from the Texas State Teachers Association, who is going to be speaking on, I guess, the mood of and the tone and the response from teachers and what their thoughts are in terms of where we're going and how really we're jeopardizing their safety when we allow these types of bills to pass. But I remember as I was teaching one of my classes, and it took me a minute to figure out, we were doing something on, you know, I had to set up the projector and teach, trying to show them something online. And it took me a minute to figure all of that out. And part of our government conversation was the Second Amendment and everything, and that was when Campus Carry had passed. And you know, I said, what are you guys' thoughts on, you know, me carrying a gun or you carrying a gun here on campus? And they're like, Professor, we would never want you to carry a gun. You don't even know how to turn on a PowerPoint presentation. We definitely wouldn't, you know, trust you with a gun in this classroom. And that was the truth. The fact is, teachers are doing so much in the classrooms that the last thing that we need to do is give them guns or allow their students to carry guns. And that was a scary thing. Fortunately, we never had any incidents in my classroom, but that doesn't mean that others hadn't. And unfortunately, we had a huge incident here in the state of Texas just a couple of weeks ago. So I am going to introduce Carrie Griffith, who is with the Texas State Teachers Association. Carrie, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And our prayers are to all of the Uvalde families that have suffered, that are continuing to suffer, that are continuing to bury their loved ones. And as a representative of the Texas State Teachers Association, I can't imagine the frustration in the beginning. One of the immediate stories or pieces to this developing story was a teacher left the door propped. And unfortunately, the truth came out that that was not true, that did not happen to the extent that the story was being told. But But often in our communities, we vilify teachers. If there's anything that goes wrong in society, it's because of teachers and teachers. And as an educator, my daughter, who is also a teacher, it frustrates me because not only have been walking those shoes, but I know, speaking to my daughter every day, of what teachers have to go through just through COVID, through the beginning of COVID, and having to learn the technology, and then parents getting mad because their children were not signing on, and teachers had to move from dodging bullets at school to dodging a deadly virus during the pandemic to masks, to now we're back to talking about arming teachers. What are you hearing, and what are the thoughts of the Texas State Teachers Association regarding arming teachers, and where this conversation has gone since the shooting happened there at Uvalde?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think it's so true. The knee-jerk reaction of state leaders and many lawmakers is to force the correction on the teacher, to blame the teacher, to vilify the teacher, like you said. If teachers already are doing so much, and whenever there's a problem, we just need to train the teachers to do better, is sort of the general approach. And we're seeing that again, of course, in the aftermath. The first thing that was said was, well, let's get those teachers armed. But it's ludicrous. Where is a teacher going to keep a gun that's safe? What if the shooting happens in the hallway or on the bus? What if the teacher doesn't know how to use a gun? And then, oftentimes the shooters are students themselves, and teachers have really close relationships with students. And so even in a situation where a teacher was being expected to fire at a student, that would be someone that teacher likely had a relationship with. So, it's just all very complicated. And it's all, like I said, ludicrous, the notion that that safety is now also the responsibility of the teacher. We just need to stop layering on the teachers. Teachers are hurting, they're scared. Their jobs are to love and care for their students, and we need help from the outside. We need to ensure that our schools are safe places, and that doesn't come from barbed wire and guns, and it doesn't come from police officers, and it comes from the supports, the preventative supports that are offered to the communities outside the school, to the families, to the students, and to meaningful gun reform. That's a conversation that needs to be on the table.
Absolutely. Watching a lot of those court hearings when the officers were being tried, when they shot different civilians, right? Thinking that the civilians had guns, and they shot and killed these civilians. And I remember listening to one of the hearings where the officer didn't know if she had held a taser or the gun, and ended up killing one of the civilians. And what struck me at that time, and one of the parts that the prosecution really emphasized, is the training. This officer was on the force for 20 some odd years and had consistent training. In fact, she was a trainer. She trained other officers. So she was an absolute expert in handling guns, right? And handling firearms. And even she was confused, where she ended up killing an innocent civilian. And so ludicrous is a great word, to say that teachers who are not experts in this, who don't want to be experts in firearms, to say now they need to be experts more so than the actual experts. It is just mind-boggling how those words even come out of somebody's mouth, that the experts, they themselves are not expert enough to know what needs to be done, that now we want to throw that expertise on these miracle workers who are already out there performing miracles under such harsh conditions and circumstances today, to say now they need to be experts in guns is ridiculous.
And I think I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's also so important to consider the children in the room. it's the job of teachers in schools to ensure, that there are trusting relationships with our students, that they want to come to school, they feel safe coming to school, and having a school full of guns, not only won't make a student safe, isn't a place where most parents want to send their students. It's not going to make them feel safe. It's going to be a constant reminder of, this is an unsafe place. This is a war zone. And that's not what schools are.
So can you talk a little bit about the hardening schools? That was referenced a lot in some of these conversations early on. Well, we just need to harden schools, or we need to do more to make sure that the technology or whatever is there. Could you talk a little bit about what you're hearing from some of your member teachers, and what your organization's thoughts are on that part of?
Right, absolutely. So, unfortunately, the policy, policymakers have been having conversations about safe and secure learning environments for a number of years. But unfortunately, the security industry, which has is a lobbying force, has really been dominating the policy response. So there was $350 million committed at the federal level to Texas schools, and then Texas itself sort of echoed that with more money. And so this is to purchase things like metal detectors and increase police force, school resource officers, barbed wire locks, cameras, things like that. That's what the money was flagged for. But we, Texas State Teachers Association, and educators all over the country are saying that this is actually the opportunity cost of this is the quality, meaningful systemic supports like mental health supports. And so, just the statistics of the lack of mental health supports, the insufficient resources and campus-based personnel to support teachers in Texas is really jaw-dropping. There's a group called the Hopeful Futures Campaign, which is a coalition of national organizations that's focused on the mental health care of youth, especially in schools. And they recently published a report card that ranks the states based on 8 policy areas and sort of measures states based on how well they serve the mental health needs of students in schools and teachers, but students in particular. And Texas ranked 41. So that's pretty abysmal. And one of the policy areas, one of them is just access to personnel. So we're just talking about people on the ground, not the police officers, but the counselors and the psychologists. And so I'll share a few statistics. Texas has 1 school counselor for every 410 students, and the ratio is the recommended ratio is 1 to 250. So we're twice what we should be. And then you couple that with the fact that many of our counselors are being used to administer testing and everything like that. So they're not actually supporting mental health needs as needed, and they're not available. The capacity isn't there for some of these things. Texas has 1 school psychologist for every 4,962 students. So 5,000, and the recommended ratio is 500. And then Texas has 1 school social worker for every 13,604 students. And the recommended ratio is 1 to 250. So sometimes in place of social workers, some schools use like parent support specialists, but that's oftentimes paid for at the city level, and it's not a guaranteed position. And it's not, of course, a licensed social worker. So the services aren't actually as rich or robust as they need to be. And then, obviously just these numbers are all shocking in their own right, but then there's a disproportionate impact on which students in which communities have schools surrounded by barbed wire and metal detectors and police officers, and which schools don't, and which schools have sufficient mental health supports and which schools don't. And so even though, these averages are abysmal, when you dig deeper down into the data and find out where they're locating, it's even worse. So that's just something to consider. So
well, and what excuse me, and what you're talking about, the psychologists, the therapists, and you're citing how Texas is one of the lowest, the states that puts least resources to provide those students the resources they need to get through to this. But you also mentioned how the state legislature funded or put in a lot of money for the hardening schools to for example, the barbed wire or what have you. It seems counterproductive, right? Like you mentioned the psychologists and the therapists, those would be proactive measures, right? To address this before it gets out of hand. But it seems the Texas legislature and the governor are prioritizing the reactive part of it, not to keep the children safe, but what to do when they bring guns, as opposed to let's stop them and give them the resources they need, so that that's never a conversation or a thought that these children have.
Absolutely. They're not only prioritizing the reactive part of it, they're disguising it, they're veiling that in as preemptive. So it's even worse. It's this expectation that at the doorstep, the kids coming into the school are dangerous, the teachers are dangerous. So not only are they funding reactive measures, they're just calling it preventative and just completely ignoring what experts know to be true preventative measures. And then, something that, my specialty is in education policy, not health policy, but something that we know to be lacking are just the mental health supports that are in the community that are available to students and family members, or that should be available to students and family members, and especially family members and adults in the community, because it's all connected. A lot of this could come in the form of the community school supports that we advocate for session after session after session, but instead of funding, research-based school improvement measures like community schools, we just authorize privatization and school takeovers, and we permit that and we incentivize that. So it's maddening. It's maddening. And even after Uvalde, the governor's solution was to have another commission, to have another committee, to have another, we're tired of conversations. We've had the conversations. We had them after Santa Fe. We had them after El Paso. We had them after Midland, Odessa. I'm from Midland, Odessa myself. And we're done talking. We need action, but unfortunately still not on the table is meaningful gun laws. That's still not on the table. On the table is training teachers. I want to say one interesting thing in that report that I referenced. One of the only policy area of those 8 that the Hopeful Futures campaign found Texas to be sort of moderately okay with was training teachers. And taken as a whole, it is important to train teachers as gatekeepers, but you can't, that's meaningless if those teachers don't have anyone, if they, identify a student, say, with suicidal tendencies or who might potentially be a danger to themselves or others. Identifying that and having gatekeeper training, as it's called, without having anywhere to go to next is a waste of time. And something, unfortunately, that Texas does is constantly ticking the box for the constituency. We've addressed the problem because we've mandated a teacher training. And so teachers are constantly being trained to do things that are less and less and less related to the academic piece of their jobs. Again, we aren't opposed to having gatekeeper training and having teachers be aware of it, but the frequency and the level of mandate that constantly comes at teachers in the form of training, and then everything stops there. It's a cheap and easy way to say that something has been done, but that's not sufficient, and that's a burden on teachers.
Well, and cheap is a good way to put it, because it's also a cheap excuse, right, to say this is what we're doing. And as a former educator, my daughter being an educator, it seems there's a huge cognitive dissonance in our communities, that we think we see teachers as these beings who have unlimited time and unlimited ability to be experts in all of these areas, and they have to be completely loving and completely everything to every child at every minute of every day they're with a child. You can't get frustrated. You can't look at your phone for 2 minutes. You can't be sick. You can't, because the little doctor, you know, whatever, if you got COVID, you have to, you know, stories of teachers still having to teach, whether it was online, even though they had COVID, or not wanting to report that or whatever, because there were, you know, consequences to being sick. But parents were upset because the teachers, it was just all teachers. And it is so frustrating, because if anybody steps back to see a teacher as a normal human being, who they themselves have families and immunocompromised parents or children at home, dodging the pandemic, but then having to go to school the next day after a mass school shooting, and having to be those therapists and counselors for their own students. There were many students who were scared to go to school the next day, or parents who chose not to send their children. The teachers pretty much didn't have a choice. You still have to go to school the next day when there's a mass shooting. You still have to keep that smile on. You still have to perform for these children who are looking to you as the teacher for all of the answers. And oh my gosh, then to imagine, well, why don't you carry a gun, teacher? Why aren't we teaching you? What would you do to protect me? I imagine, have you heard any stories or have teachers shared with you any of anecdotally anything that students would come to them about in terms of, or questions in terms of how they feel they need to protect their students, or conversations that students had? I can tell you, my daughter sent me a video that was circulating with teachers on how to use a chair, to keep a chair near the door of their classroom, and how to use it as an automatic lock from the inside, because from my understanding, there's some classrooms that teachers can't lock from the inside. They can only be open on the outside from the principal or from whatever. So the classroom doors can't be locked on the inside. So a teacher, if there is an armed intruder, many of these classrooms can't even be locked on the inside. So teachers have to kind of figure out how they're going to improvise on the inside. Are you aware of any of those stories, or have you heard anything from your teachers?
I mean, the stories that I hear most from teachers, of course, teachers are nurturing by nature, and they have the concerns themselves, but that's not the priority. The priority is always the children, and the concerns that we are hearing from members and from friends. I was a teacher for 10 years. My husband was a teacher. I have 3 children in public schools. What we're hearing is the children are afraid. That this isn't a story from a member, but it's a personal story. The last day of school, I took our school district passes out free ice cream coupons at Dairy Queen. There's a Dairy Queen in our neighborhood. And so I took my daughters to Dairy Queen after school, and a bunch of the kids from their school were in line, and they, I was overhearing a conversation between a bunch of little boys, and they were children of color, and they were saying, just as they may as well have been saying, my hair is brown. They were saying, I might get shot at school. And it just broke my heart. It was so hard to hear. It was hard to hear as a parent. It was hard to hear. It was like I didn't want my kids to hear it, but that was their reality. And then they were with their parents, and that's their reality. And it was the last day of school, and we were in line for an ice cream cone.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking. And I got a lot of calls from parents scared, not wanting to send their children to school the next day, and calling my daughter and checking in, how are you doing? And the story that you just said of how children, they're so resilient. And I hope parents are having those conversations with their children, or just not even having the conversations, but listening to those real fears. And we're going to have a Dr. Puckett Perez, who's going to be joining us later to talk about some of the psychology and how we can help our children through this pain, right? Because it's trauma. But when you just mentioned the story, I recall a conversation that I had with my son when he was in our local high school here. And he came home, and kids are just amazing. But if you sit down and listen to them many times, they teach us so much. I love kids because I'm always learning sometimes what a jerk I am as an adult, right? But also how smart they are and what they're picking up on that we don't pick up on. And my son one day, he said, Mom, this kid came to school and he showed me his binder. My son's school is majority minority, and or his high school was. And he said, Mom, this white kid showed me this binder, and he had all of these different colorings of the Confederate flag. And I said, the Confederate flag at your school? He's like, yeah, Mom, nobody talks to this kid. He sat next to me, he said, and he was showing me all of his Confederate flag drawings. I said, well, what did you say? And I'm thinking that my son would say, dude, that's wrong, or, do you know what that means, or whatever. He said, I just told him, oh man, that's really cool. I really like that design. That Confederate flag is really cool. Now, we're Mexican. My son knows the Confederate flag and what it means in Texas history. I said, why would you tell him that, son? And he said, Mom, if anybody shoots the school, it'll be a kid like him, probably him. He said, so I wanted to make sure that he remembered me as somebody who was nice to him and liked his Confederate flag drawing. My jaw dropped, because this was a 15, 16-year-old at that time, calculating ahead, calculating how he would dodge a bullet should this kid come back and try to kill him, how to mitigate any prospective problems or damage in the future. That, to me, I will never forget the thought process that this young child was thinking through when addressing a drawing at a school. And, though our children are having those very sad conversations that we fortunately were privileged enough, even through our own upbringing, we had Columbine, but we didn't have to the extent that our children have now. And it's so real, the trauma that we're imposing on our children.
It is.
And our teachers. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our community, or any ways that people or that teachers can be involved with your organization and ensuring that we are the best advocates possible for your members, and whether you're in Texas or even nationwide? I'm sure there are sister organizations in other states as well. But how can we best advocate or better hear the concerns of teachers when those conversations are happening with lawmakers talking about arming teachers or hardening schools more? What can we do to better help you all?
Absolutely. Well, we will be sort of following this issue. We'll be on the front lines with our recommendations. And you're right, we are an affiliate, a state affiliate of the National Education Association. And so we're aligned in our position on this issue, and we'll be aligned nationally. And so for the conversations that happen from here out and in session, for all the legislation filed, we'll be closely following and putting out positions, and all of these things are posted on our website and circulate among our communities. I'm happy to answer a call from anyone to help answer, explain, or explain the nuances of any position or concern that we have related to teachers specific to this issue.
So in prepping for now that we're at the end of the school year and the upcoming new school year, we will not have gone into session yet. So the legislature will not have met by August. Is there anything specifically that the teachers are doing just to wrap this up? Is it more engagement and involvement in preparing to advocate, or is it just really hoping for the best and staying focused on closing the achievement gap, because that's a whole nother conversation there? What are we seeing that is being done, or that we could do from here until August before the next school year starts and we have these serious conversations again?
I mean, I think just, as simple as it sounds, I think just changing the narrative of teachers, in that comes one voice at a time, one conversation at a time, and just really appreciating and recognizing what our teachers do and how hard they work and how they truly do the work for the students. I don't think it's anyone, unless they've been in a rabbit hole, is well aware of the teacher shortage that's happening. And this is just another straw that's breaking the camel's back, where not only have teachers been overburdened by so much, there's now a sense of fearing for their lives. And there are marches happening all over the country, one tomorrow in Austin, and again all over the country. And so just participating and being that voice, and especially I ask our our brothers and sisters who maybe haven't been as extreme in their demand for gun policy changes, to maybe to really consider things that we consider to be common sense, and that I feel like we all should consider to be common sense and agree, like just requiring a background check of anyone who wants to purchase a firearm, banning assault style weapons. These are weapons of war, making gun trafficking a federal crime with a harsh penalty, passing red flag legislation, and just agreeing to hear that this isn't an attack on the Second Amendment, and this isn't an attack on hunting. And this shouldn't be a political conversation at this point. This is about our students. So two answers, maybe just conceding to conversation that's meaningful, that's not just chit chat, and really recognizing that there are some common sense changes that I think would really help support teachers by making the outside world safer. And then just recognizing teachers, it's the hardest job in the world, and it's one that many are on food stamps doing. So
well, and we always talk, when we talk about mental health, and we talk about the mental health of our students, their families, but we never really talk about the mental health of our teachers, and the mental toll that it takes. And as a state legislator, I remember going to the Capitol, and they're feeling a little anxious. It was, right after the January 6th attack on our US Capitol, and the guns, and knowing that we were vulnerable because you can have guns at the Capitol, and but still knowing that, even though I was feeling anxious, I could go to my office and shut my door and not accept visitors. Teachers can't do that. They can't just go to their classroom and say, I'm not going to see students today. And yet they have to work through it. And we never really talk about giving them the resources or the additional support that they need to address, any anxiety or any fears or trauma that these teachers are experiencing because of the things that they see. And they can't hide from it, like many of us can, whether we're working from home or in an adult environment where we see the same 6 people every day or what have you. We don't give that flexibility, we don't give that privilege to our teachers, and we're asking them for so much. And I think that I've often said that if everybody in America got to be a teacher for at least 1 year, we would have a different conversation. There would be a greater appreciation of what they have to go through, not only preparing our students, but also financially, having to buy the school supplies or the additional resources. There are
Right.
teachers out there who wash their students' clothes when, in the younger grades, because the children don't eat, or the teachers who out of their own pocket take the children food because they may not have that. They know their children who don't have the resources, abusive parents, all of that, which each little child is their own universe that the teacher has to kind of nurture and oversee that little universe. But then when that child falters in one way or another, it's automatically the teacher's fault. And we want to punish the teacher, and we want to dock her pay, and we want to do all of these things, when we fail to really step back and see all of the load of the universe that we're putting on these individuals to
Right.
say, here is all the problems in society, fix it in your 8 hours today. If not, you're gonna get dinged. And it's asinine, it is what it is. And so I want to thank you and your organization and all of your members for being the true warriors out there every day, unarmed,
Thank you.
that armed with love, armed with passion, armed with education. That is the only arming that we need to give you. In addition, that you give, that we need to get army with the resources to not solve the world's problems, but to educate our children and protect yourselves and not be in the line of this fire and this political nonsense that we put you through.
Absolutely. It sounds trite, but money does matter in education, and every conversation comes back to money. Texas rankings in per student funding are more abysmal even than our mental health supports, and it all factors back into how much personnel we can afford and how much break time we can give teachers in planning time, which all, of course, is connected to mental health. So absolutely, the resources are a number one priority.
And you touched a little bit about this, and we'll wrap up here shortly. But when it comes to resources, and one of the governor's priorities this upcoming session is going to be school privatization, and it's an understanding that that's where he's going to really be leaning a lot. Hopefully, he doesn't get reelected, but he'll be leaning a lot on school privatization, the vouchers, or whatever they want to call it, tax exemptions, whatever they want to call it, their school vouchers. It's privatization of our public schools. It's taking away money from our neighborhood public schools to give the resources that they need, to get the additional school counselors and the psychologists and the therapists there, and the books and all of that stuff, and putting it in other non-transparent, non-accountable organizations. And that's going to be, it's going to exacerbate the problem and make the situation even worse for our children and for our neighborhood public schools, should we go that route. And there are some, some lawmakers who are supporting those initiatives, and we need to be very mindful and watch out for that, because whether it's a online school or whatever they want to call it, school choice, whatever they want to call it, the reality is it's taking away resources from our neighborhood public schools, where we have our future doctors and nurses and lawyers and police officers, and diverting those funds somewhere else, where the reality is there's no accountability, very little accountability, very little transparency. And we don't know what's happening with that money, but what we will know is that our children in our neighborhood schools and our educators will be suffering if we allow the state to go that route.
Absolutely. That's something that that is a huge part of my job, monitoring and fighting, because we need, Texas public schools are publicly funded and publicly governed, and any other scheme, charter schools, vouchers, those are not truly public. And there's a whole host of problems, which we could have our own webinar on that, but it is very important that the money be used to serve all students, not selective students, and certainly not to pad the pockets of the billionaires behind the effort.
Absolutely. And when we talk about these children and the children with, our neighborhood public schools don't have the choice to select which students they're going to educate. So if a student comes with certain issues, charter schools and our other schools can say, you're not admitted. We're not going to deal with that. But our neighborhood public schools don't have that choice. So when the issues happen at our Uvalde school districts and other schools, they are open enrollment. They accept everybody. They are not selected. Not that was a student. The shooter was not a student there. But my point is, when these children go to these schools and target some of their colleagues or their classmates, many times it's in those schools that are those open enrollment schools, and other institutions like our charter schools get to select which students they want to educate and which ones they don't, that they're going to kick back to our schools who are already under-resourced to really help these students. So you're right. We can talk about this, ad nauseum in the future, and maybe we will.
Yes,
Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Yes, we should. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers speak to this issue. So thank you so much for inviting TSTA.
Thank you. And we're always here to support you and to advocate for our wonderful teachers, our miracle workers. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your evening. Thanks. Bye-bye. Okay, thank you so much.